We are making our way through Genesis. As we study this weekend, we're going to see God's mercy and God's judgment on full display. One of the ways God often demonstrates his mercy to us is through warning signs. I don't know how you are when you see certain warning signs on the road. I tend to think that's not for me. I tend to think that's for all y'all. Like I tend to see a warning sign and assume I'm somehow exempt from it, that is for less competent drivers than myself. Or I just get used to driving a certain path, and if there's a warning sign there, I don't notice it because I've just gone down this path so often, the sign doesn't catch my attention. But one of the things I just want you to catch today in these next few minutes as we study God's word is that his mercy to you is often a warning sign that you've not noticed. I had a friend in high school, we'll call him Josh because that was his name, and still is his name. But Josh collected warning signs. Like that was a hobby that now I recognize is aggressively illegal. But at the time, I thought it was just pretty cool. You walked into Josh's room and it looked like the Department of Transportation had had a yard sale, and there's a stop sign above his bed and a railroad crossing sign and a dead end sign and a wrong way sign and even had a blasting zone ahead sign. And these were not knockoffs, these were not replicas, these were signs that Josh had stolen and hung up in his room. And I don't mean to give him a hard time for it. Unless he's 50 years old somewhere and this is his house decor. Like if he's continued to do this over the decades, Josh, if you're watching this, it's not right what you're doing. But I'm just assuming that was a teenage thing, because there's something about a teenager that probably doesn't recognize the implications of something like that. They don't recognize that the reason a sign is warning people is because someone knows there's danger ahead and they care enough about the person who's coming to give them a heads up. There's mercy in a warning sign. And that's what we see in Genesis 19. It's one of the most intense, one of the most uncomfortable, but also one of the most theologically loaded chapters of Scripture in the Bible. And one of the ways I want to start off here is just acknowledging the discomfort of what we're going to study together. This is not the sermon that a preacher would look at and say, you know what would be great for after Mother's Day weekend? Sodom and Gomorrah. But that's where it lands for us as we're studying through the book of Genesis. And what I want you to hear before you read a single verse of this chapter is that this is not a chapter about a God who loves to destroy. Some people would try to package it that way. This is a chapter, it's a story about a God who warns out of mercy before he judges. It's a God who calls out before he closes the door. It's a God who remembers the faithful and extends mercy. And so as we study this out of Genesis 18 and 19, the posture that we have is not looking back and saying, okay, what happened to Sodom? The posture we have would be, God, what are the warning signs in my life? In your mercy, how are you trying to get my attention that I need to be more sensitive towards? And so the first thing that I want you to see as we get ready, digging into this story, is sometimes the warning sign isn't for you. Sometimes it's for someone else, and it's an invitation for you to pray for someone else. Sometimes a warning sign you see, you're tempted to dismiss because you're like, well, that's not for me. But sometimes you're the person who's supposed to see it for someone else. That's what happens in Genesis 18. God's about to bring judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah. And he lets Abraham in on this. He tells Abraham about the outcry from these cities, about the evil, about how sin has just overtaken the city, how it's a place of severe darkness and depravity, and that he's going to destroy it. And when Abraham hears this, he starts doing this thing. It's kind of interesting. He starts negotiating with God like he's at a yard sale. He starts trying to talk God into not doing what God has said he's going to do. Which for some of us, we're like, well, is that even a thing? Well, if you read the story, verses 23 through and following, we'll just keep reading it. Then Abraham approached God and said, will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous people in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked. Will not the judge of all the earth do right? The Lord said, if I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Then Abraham spoke up again and said, now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, though I am nothing but dust and ashes, what if the number of the righteous is 5 less than 50? Doesn't say 45. He says, what if it's 5 less than 50? Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5 people? God says, if I find 45 there, I will not destroy it. And once again, Abraham spoke to God, what if only 40 are found there? He said, for the sake of 40, I will not do it. Then Abraham said, may the Lord not be angry, but let me speak. What if there are only 30 there that can be found? And God said, I won't do it for the sake of 30. Abraham said, now that I've been so bold as to speak to the Lord, what if only 20 can be found there? God said, for the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. Then he said, may the Lord not be angry, but let me speak just one more time. What if only 10 can be found there? And God answered, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. And when the Lord had finished speaking with Abraham, he left, and Abraham returned home. Such an interesting interaction. It teaches us so much, I think, about how intercession works. It's a word for some of those here today who are praying on behalf of other people. And you're wondering, does God hear me? Is it making a difference? It seems to. Abraham sees what's going to happen to these people. They're not his people. It's not his home. Now he has his nephew Lot that lives there. And Abraham starts interceding for this whole city. And God just keeps saying yes. Seems like God wants to say yes to these prayers. I kind of wonder why Abraham stopped at 10. I mean, he was on a roll. Why not just keep going? I think Abraham probably thought, well, Lot will have 10. I mean, Lot lives in that city. And he's going to have at least 10 people in his family that will be righteous. So he stops there. Abraham saw a warning sign. It wasn't for him, it was about someone else. And I want you to see this. His first instinct is not to judge. His first instinct is not to cancel. His first instinct is not to ghost the city. His first instinct is not to say, well, that's what you get, and to virtue signal about how he is against what's being done there. Like, instead, what's his first instinct? His instinct is to pray for, to intercede on behalf of. And intercession is often standing in the gap between someone you love and the consequences they can't see. Intercession is often standing in the gap between someone you love and the consequences that they can't see. So when someone you love is headed for destruction and you see it and they don't, how do you respond? If you could, maybe think of somebody right now. Maybe get a name in your mind where you know it, like you can see it. Like, how do you respond in that moment? There are a few ways I just want to identify that we tend to respond instead of starting with intercession. One way we tend to respond is what I would call the spectator. A spectator can sit in the stands and they've got the view, like they can see what's happening. They know what play should be called. They know the direction the game should be going, but they're not in the game. Like, they have no skin in it. They're just kind of watching things unfold, but they don't think it has anything to do with them. And so they don't really say anything. And if you ask them about that, they'd probably say, well, it's not my problem. It's not my business. I'm just going to emotionally check out of this. And so they pull back. And it sounds maybe healthy, but oftentimes it's cowardly, it's passive, and it's apathetic. You're not sure what you should do, but you should at least intercede. So just check yourself here on your prayers. Like, what percentage of your prayers are interceding for people who are on a destructive path? Now, intercession may be where it starts and not where it stops, but it should start with intercession, because intercession then gives you the wisdom on how to respond next. Another way that we tend to respond when somebody's on a destructive path is what I would call the puppeteer. The puppeteer loves the person. I think their intentions are genuinely good, but here's what's happened. Somewhere along the line, love quietly became control. And so the puppeteer tries to control the outcomes. The puppeteer decides that the way to handle this person and the path they're on is try to work the strings. And so they're working behind the scenes to control decisions, to control relationships, to control emotions. And so when someone comes to them and says, I'm struggling with this, or I'm feeling sad or anxious or angry, the puppeteer says, well, let me tell you all the reasons why you shouldn't feel that way. And they're trying to control the person. Here's the theological problem with being a puppeteer. You're often trying to do from the outside what God can only do from the inside. You've decided to put it on yourself to be God in this person's life or situation, which puts a tremendous amount of pressure on you and on that relationship. Because when they don't do what you want them to do, it doesn't work. And what ends up happening oftentimes when you're the puppeteer is the person learns to pretend around you, but it's not real. Like they know they can't be sad or anxious or struggling with something around you. And so around you, they pretend to be something they're not. And we end up trying to do on the outside what only God can do on the inside. Third response is the fixer. A fixer has a hard time watching someone they love suffer consequences. So every time consequence comes knocking at the door, the fixer answers it first. And they pay the bill and they make the call and they smooth it over and they step in front of the fallout and absorb it for themselves because they would rather take the hit than watch someone they love get hurt. And as a recovering fixer, I can tell you that this can be done out of love. Here's what the fixer doesn't realize. Sometimes the very thing God is using to wake someone up is the consequence that you keep protecting them from. Sometimes the very thing God is using to wake them up is a consequence that you keep protecting them from. Now, how do you know when it's helpful to step in? How do you know when it's helpful to do what's right? It comes from intercession. Like if you're praying for that person, if you're praying for wisdom, if you're praying for God's intervention, then you've got some wisdom to draw from. Like, okay, now is the time where you should say something. Now is the time where you can step in and protect. But it has to come from this place of intercession. And so that's what Abraham does. He prays and he steps into this gap. He starts talking to God on behalf of this community. And can I just tell you something? And some of you who are doing this, you know it. This can be exhausting. Because you are standing in the gap for someone and they don't know it and they don't appreciate it and you're not sure it's going to make a difference. You're fighting a battle that no one sees. Don't give up. God hears your prayers. You play this out. If I could speak to some of you who are parents of teenagers. Your teenager's struggling. Maybe they're isolating in some ways that have started to concern you, like they go to their room and they close the door, and their phone is hidden, and grades are dropping, and there's one-word answers if you're lucky. The spectator backs off and calls it, I'm just gonna give them space. I'm just respecting their independence, but in reality, you're afraid of how they're gonna respond. You're afraid that if you say too much or do too much, that they'll reject you. There's the puppeteer who obsessively checks every text and tracks every location. And I'm not saying there's not a place for that. I did those things. But there's a line where you start to feel more like a CIA agent, like you obsessively follow it, and you got lots of information, but very little connection. And then there's the fixer who calls the school, schedules a counselor, rearranges everything on the outside to try to fix what's happening on the inside. The intercessor does something different. An intercessor starts with prayer and then sits on the edge of the bed of their teenager and says something like this, I don't need you to talk right now, but I want you to know I see you and I know something's going on. I just want you to know I'm not going anywhere. I'm not exactly sure the best way to help you, but I do want you to know this. I am praying for you every single day, and I'm here for you. And then you get up and you walk out. Who do you have in your life right now who's headed toward danger? Is God bringing somebody to mind? Are there some warning signs you see that they can't see? I think of my friend that I'll call Jared. I could see his marriage falling apart, I think, before he could. Just little things, the way he talked about his wife, the way he started traveling more, there was just something in a way that you know, but you can't fully explain it. You just know it's not good. And I look back on that, I recognize that I didn't really do anything about it. I mean, I prayed a little, but really vaguely, like, God be with Jared. I didn't call him. I didn't sit down with him. I didn't tell him I was interceding on his behalf. I didn't step into the gap in any intentional way. I just told myself it's not really my place and it's not really my business. About a year after that, he told me he was getting a divorce, and I remember just that moment of sitting there thinking, I saw this coming. Like, I saw this coming. I saw the warning signs, but I treated those warning signs like, well, since they're not for me to pay attention to. And I just want to, before I move on, I just want to say something to some of you who are on the other side of the room, and you've got somebody like this in your life, and they keep praying for you, and they keep speaking a word to you, and you're annoyed by it, and maybe they don't do it quite right, and maybe they're getting some of the details wrong. But if you've got somebody who's trying to step in the gap, if you have somebody in your life who loves you enough to try to speak to you about some concerns that they have, if you have somebody who's come to you and says, hey, I'm worried about you, here's some things that I see. Like, if you want to, you can receive that as judgment, you can go on the defensive, you can be dismissive, or you can be thankful that you've got somebody like that who cares enough to not give up. Abraham steps into this space and he intercedes. Second thing we see here is God sends a warning before he sends judgment. We get to Genesis 19. The two angels that were with God, if you remember from last week, they were with God at Abraham's tent. These two angels arrive in Sodom. And verse 1 says, the two angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of the city. Lot sees these two visitors. He seems to have the similar instinct that Abraham had when he sees them. Like, he knows there's something special about them, and he goes to them. He insists that they come to his house. He makes them a meal. He shows them hospitality. And then things take a very dark turn in verses 4 and 5. Before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part, so all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house, and they called out to Lot, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out so that we can have sex with them. So you have this very explicit, very disturbing scene that unfolds here. This all the men from all the town, young and old, sexual assault. That's our plan. They're not ashamed of it. They come demanding it. And the depravity of the city is on full display. And in the chaos of this, Lot does something that's really difficult to read, verses 6 through 8. Lot went outside to meet them, and he shut the door behind him, and said, my friends, red flag there, my friends, don't do this wicked thing. Look, I have two daughters who've never slept with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do what you like with them. But don't do anything to these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof. And this is so disturbing. It is a devastating thing, a devastating scene that shows us how sin consumes, makes people slaves, how it escalates. We read about Lot just a few chapters earlier, walking alongside Abraham, and he chooses the greener grass. And he moves toward Sodom. And then we keep reading the story, and he's moved into Sodom. And we keep reading the story, and now he's sitting at the gate of Sodom, indicating that he's become a leader of that community. And after years of being in this environment, like, his moral compass is so damaged that this is his solution. That darkness has warped his mind. And I think he's doing something here that he couldn't have imagined himself doing years earlier. And there's just something about, like, prolonged proximity to darkness that corrupts and erodes. And you find yourself doing something you never thought you would do and calling it a reasonable response. I'm sure for Lot there were warning signs, and now he doesn't really notice them. In the middle of all of this, though, as you might guess, the angels have had enough. So the angels jump in verse 11. It says, then they struck the men who were at the door of the house, young and old, with blindness, so they could not find the door. Verse 11 would indicate that even though they're blind, they keep trying to open the door. Like, sin had taken control of their desires to such a degree that even being struck with blindness doesn't seem to send them on their way. And the angels turn to Lot. They say to verses 12 and 13, do you have anyone else here, sons-in-law, sons or daughters, or anyone else in this city who belongs to you? Get them out of here, because we're going to destroy this place. Their warning to Lot is get your family and get out. And here's the way I put this in your notes is even when the mission was judgment, God made sure mercy got there first. God opened a door for mercy. So the angels don't show up and immediately torch the city. They warn Lot. And God's warning wasn't meant to be a threat. It was meant to be mercy. And I just want you to hear some of this, because if you're seeing some warning signs from God, there's part of you that wants to receive it as punishment. It feels like God is against you. You feel like the conviction you've been dealing with is somehow God's cruelty, but in fact, it's God's mercy. And so I just want to give you some ways that I think God might be trying to get your attention, some ways I think he was trying to get Lot's attention. Because what ends up happening for some of us is God starts sending us warnings. And what we end up doing is we start seeing those warning signs as things like, oh, it's just some stress in my life right now. Or we'll say, well, it's just some bad luck that I've been dealing with. I'm just going through a difficult season. Meanwhile, it's a sign from God out of his mercy that's meant to get your attention. And all of us, if we're honest, can have a hard time not ignoring the warnings, even when they come from people who love us. I know what it's like to give a warning sign that gets completely ignored, because it happened this week. So recently, my son told me that he and his wife are getting a dog, and all of my kids have done this. They get married, they immediately get a dog, and it's such a bad decision. Did we do that? Yeah, we did. But it just, lots of stress. It isn't cheap. When they travel, guess who gets to take care of the dog? The fixer, or the fixer's wife, takes care of the dog. So I texted him this text when I found this out. I said, hey, can I talk you out of this idea of getting a dog? In your first year of marriage, a dog will add a fair amount of extra stress and expense. Very reasonable, very measured, very wise. He texted me back. Here's the text I got back from him. I've got to learn from my own mistakes, and he gives me the salute. It's the most respectful dismissal. He basically says, I hear you, I honor you, but I'm gonna do it my way. And I think that for many of us, this is how we receive God's warnings. I acknowledge that. I hear that, I respect you, but you know what? I gotta learn from my own mistakes. Here are 5 warnings that God sends that I think we can miss. Number 1 is the surround sound. When multiple people are saying the same thing, when 3 or 4 people in your life are giving you caution about the same thing, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're right, but it certainly means that you should listen. It's not a coincidence, and God might be using some surround sound to get your attention. The real way you know that this is a warning sign is how you respond to it when it happens. So if you've got 2, 3, 4 people who are all expressing some caution to you, and your response is to be dismissive or defensive, it's a much greater likelihood that what they're saying should be a warning sign to you. Does that make sense? The more defensive you are about those 3 or 4 people trying to speak to you about something, the more likely it is that what they're saying is something you need to hear. Number 2 is the cover-up. It's when secrecy becomes a lifestyle. If there's a part of your life that you're going out of your way to keep hidden, that should be a significant warning sign. So you delete your browser history, you angle the phone screen away from somebody, you've got this whole other version of yourself that people in your life have never seen. That's hiding, and destruction often begins with hiding. Or if I could say this another way, hiding is a warning sign that destruction is coming. Hiding is a warning sign that destruction is coming. Number 3 is the missing piece. When peace disappears and you pretend like it hasn't. So you're not sleeping well and everything feels heavy and you've got this kind of low-grade anxiety that's running in the background like this app that you can't close, and you keep telling yourself you're fine, but you're not fine. Philippians 4 says that the peace of God will guard your heart and your mind in Christ Jesus. And if you just find yourself in this place where your peace is gone and you can't figure out where it went, you might be tempted to say, well, it's just stress. It's just the busyness of the season, and maybe it is, or maybe it's God saying, something in your life is out of alignment with me. Your spirit knows it, even if your mind won't admit it. Pay attention. Number 4 is the rerun. This is when you have the same consequence that just keeps showing up in your life. It's the different relationship, but it's the same fight. It's a different job, but it's the same problem. It's a different year, but it's the same struggle. And at some point, you have to stop blaming the other people and the circumstances, and you have to start asking yourself, what is God trying to teach me that I just can't seem to see? Because you keep ending up in the same place. And when you see that pattern, a pattern in your life like this is often a warning sign on repeat. It's a warning sign on repeat. God's hoping you're gonna pick up on the pattern, and every time it plays out, it gets a little bit louder as he's trying to get your attention. Number 5 is the mirror. This is when someone else's destruction looks really familiar. Like you watch somebody else's marriage fall apart, and there's something in you that says, that's the road we're on. It's the road we're on. You hear about someone else losing everything because of an addiction, and there's this whisper to you, that's gonna be me in 5 years. And you see the consequence in someone else's life and you feel exposed. That's a warning sign. It's got somebody else's name on it, but it's your address. And I think Lot had every one of these 5 warnings in his life. As I read through the story, I think it's a pretty safe assumption that all 5 of these he would have had the opportunity to see, but he missed them all. What we see next here in the story is the angels don't whisper to Lot, they grab a hold of him. And this is theologically significant because it really challenges how so many of us think about grace. We tend to think of God's grace as kind of this gentle knock at the door, kind of soothing invitation. Hey, can I just talk to you for a minute about the path you're on? And what we find in this story is God's grace is much more aggressive. So look, here's why I put this in your notes. Grace is trying to drag you out of what you're too comfortable to leave. The angels tell Lot to get out. The warning is clear. The danger is real. The clock is ticking. Verse 14, Lot goes to his sons-in-law, tells them the city's about to be destroyed. Says that his sons-in-law thought he was joking. They laugh at him. They roll their eyes. They don't believe the warning. It feels like an overreaction to them. And I know that even in the midst of this sermon, that's how some of you respond. You listen to this and you're like, okay, that was a long time ago. And I don't really think what I'm kind of caught up in is that big of a deal. I see some warning signs, but I think those are for other people. I think I'll be the exception. Hey Kyle, just relax a little bit. Verse 15 and 16. With the coming of dawn, the angels urged Lot, saying, hurry, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away when the city is punished. When he, what? Hesitated. When he hesitated, the men grasped him by his hands and the hands of his wife and 2 daughters, and they led them safely out of the city, for the Lord was merciful to them. That word hesitate. It's this idea not of pausing. It's this idea of being caught by something. Dawn is breaking, fire is coming, the angels are saying go, and Lot's like, and he hesitates. But the angels grab a hold of him. Sometimes grace doesn't look like an open door, sometimes it looks like a firm hand. The angels physically drag him out of the city. The Hebrew word here for grab to hold is seized. They seized him. And the phrase I don't want you to miss is in verse 16. It says, why? Why did grace do this for them? It's because the Lord was merciful to them. The Lord was so merciful that he dragged them out of Sodom. That was mercy. I don't think it felt like mercy. I think it felt disruptive. I think it felt aggressive. I think it felt heavy-handed. It felt like they were losing something they'd spent their life building, but it was mercy. It was mercy. And maybe you're getting some of this kind of mercy in your life where God is seizing some things, he's grabbing hold of some things, and it feels heavy-handed, and it doesn't seem fair, and it seems like God's taking something from you. But what if God's not punishing you? What if he's pulling you because he can see something coming that you can't. Grace doesn't always knock politely at the door. Sometimes, thank the Lord, it kicks down the door and grabs a hold of you and drags you out. And there's a number of people in this room who would give that amen. They're so thankful that God's grace was relentless enough to beat down the door. Here's what you see next in this story. The most dangerous moment of any journey is when you look back. Lot's family is out. They're on the road. The angels have given them clear instructions. Verse 17, as soon as they had brought them out, one of them said, flee for your lives. Don't look back. Don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains, or you will be swept away. Couldn't be more clear. Don't look back. Move forward. Don't stop. 24 and 26, then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord of the heavens. Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, destroying all those living in the cities and also the vegetation in the land. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. She looks back. That word for looks back is looking back longingly. That might even be the way it's translated. She looks back longingly. It's literally on fire. Her past is on fire, and there's something within her that still looks back. Here's the way I put this in your notes. You can't move forward into what God has for you if your heart is still attached to what he brought you out of. And this gets a little personal for us, because that can be a daily challenge to not look back. You talk to somebody maybe who's gotten caught up in an addiction or gotten caught up in an affair, and they would tell you, a lot of them would tell you that walking away from that wasn't necessarily the hardest part. In other words, the hardest part wasn't necessarily a decision to leave, it's a decision to not look back. And the reason for that is because leaving is one decision, but staying gone is 1,000 decisions. Leaving is one decision, but not looking back is 1,000 decisions. And Lot's wife is rescued, but she didn't make it. She looks back. And there's part of me that wants to skip this part of the story because, again, it's disturbing, and there's enough disturbing parts of the story. But there's Luke chapter 17, the only time Jesus ever mentions Lot's wife. And here's what he says. Verse 32, remember Lot's wife. Okay, I guess I'll mention that. Let's take a moment here and remember Lot's wife. Just remember that it's possible to be rescued, but not leave the past behind, to not focus on what's ahead. Lastly, in our story, we see God's mercy. It says, even in judgment, God remembered. After all the fire and all the destruction and all the devastation, there's just this little verse in verse 29 sitting at the end of the chapter. It says, so when God destroyed the cities of the plain, he remembered. He remembered Abraham, and he brought Lot out of the catastrophe that overthrew the cities where Lot had lived. So that's interesting. It says God remembered who? Abraham. And he brought Lot out. It doesn't say God remembered Lot's righteousness. It doesn't say that Lot earned his rescue through good behavior, that Lot's track record was impressive enough. You know, he made some mistakes, but no, it says God remembered Abraham. I specifically think God remembers Abraham's righteousness and Abraham's faith and Abraham's intercession. Because of that, Lot was saved. Lot wasn't rescued because of his own righteousness. He was rescued because of Abraham's righteousness, because of Abraham's intercession. So Lot hesitates. Lot's wife looks back. Lot's son-in-law laugh. And yet Lot survives. And what I want you to catch as we wrap this up is this is a picture of the gospel. This is a picture of your story and my story, because we are people who hesitate, and we are people who look back, and we are people who get comfortable in places where we never should have settled. And someone else's faithfulness has covered our failure. Someone else stood in the gap, that Jesus is the ultimate intercessor, that he stood between us and our consequences that we couldn't see. He absorbed the judgment that we deserved. And it's not because of your faithfulness or my faithfulness that grace grabs a hold of us. It's because of Jesus. And I just want to say something here before we're done. And this isn't easy to say. But the story of Sodom and Gomorrah is not it's not just a story about what happened. It is a story about what will happen. It's a story about judgment. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 6 says, God made Sodom an example of what's coming for those who refuse him. And that's not something I say at the end of this to scare you. It's something I say to point out God's mercy to you. That God and his mercy in this message, with this story, is holding up a sign. It's a warning sign. There is a day coming when we will face judgment. The breathtakingly good news is that Jesus has grabbed a hold of you and grace is available to pull you out right now. So can you just, in a moment of humility and honesty, ask yourself maybe what warning signs you're ignoring. Maybe you're ignoring someone else's warning sign. There's somebody that you need to be praying for, somebody who needs you to stand in the gap. Maybe God's been sending you warning signs, not to punish you, but to rescue you, and you've got these convictions and you keep pushing it down, and there's a still small voice that you keep drowning out. And maybe like Lot, right now you're hesitating. Like you know what you need to leave behind. You know what God's trying to pull you out of. But it's scary and it's not comfortable and you're not sure you're ready to leave behind the city even though it's on fire. Maybe you're like Lot's wife where you've been rescued but your heart is just still looking back and you're just still attached to kind of the old life and the old identity and the old normal. There was just something about that felt safe because you knew what to expect. Listen, what God has ahead of you is better than anything that's behind you. And so I just want to speak to you like I think the angels spoke to Lot when they came and knocked on his door. I don't think knocked gently. I don't think they pulled up a chair. I don't think they lit a candle and said, hey, buddy, whenever you're ready, like no pressure, take your time. We just want you to know some options that are available to you. If you'd like to talk to somebody, we've made some of those people available. If this week isn't good for you, maybe next week would be fine. Like that's not the tone. They reach in, they grab him, they seize him, and they pull him out. And Lot stands there, hesitating, like he's got some kind of decision to make. There's no decision. Like this is it. This is the time. And I know that there's some of you, because I know what this is like, where you say, I'll deal with this next year. But you said that last year, which means that this year is next year. Some of you have been saying when the kids get older or when the season changes, hey, the kids are older, the season has changed. And you're still standing in the doorway, looking at the same house, having the same conversation with yourself. You've been having it for years. And I'm just saying, if grace has got a hold of you and it is pulling, stop fighting it. Stop fighting the hand of God in your life. He is not here to punish you. He is here to save you. He's here to rescue you. Stop asking for 5 more minutes and run with grace into what he has.